Hi everyone, my name is Lindsay. Um, this week I had chapter 3 of the Johnston book, which is titled Nevermind. First, I would just like to apologize for my video coming in late. I have been a little bit under the weather, and today's the first day that I was able to get out of bed all week. So I do apologize for that. I did make a little PowerPoint slideshow to go along just to cover like the main points of what I would be talking about, just because I know for myself I'm more of a visual learner, a visual person, so I figured if that could be helpful to anyone else, then I would do that. So to talk about the chapter, the whole chapter pretty much focuses on mentalism and how to avoid thinking and speaking in mentalistic terms. As behavior analysts, we don't really focus on mentalism and I guess private events as being causes of behavior because they're not readily observable. So the chapter kind of focused a lot on that. The first thing that I found to talk about were the causes and gaps, which are mentioned on page 50 of the Johnston book. He points out that behavior is a result of history, something that happened in the past to make us behave the way that we're behaving in the present. So that can mean something that happened a few hours earlier, something that happened days earlier, a year earlier, could have happened seconds earlier. Basically, they're just saying that any behavior is a result of history. And then next, they really dived into mentalism. So, mentalism is defined as the tendency to look for the causes of a behavior in a mental universe. Basically, that's when we run into a problem because we're looking at a physical behavior and mentalism looks at what's going on in the mind. So it's hard to make the connection, which brings us down to the mind-body problem. And a big discussion question that Johnston kind of brings up is how can something lacking physical dimensions affect physical events such as behavior? And basically, reading in this section, it's talking about that neither mind nor matter can be reduced to the other in any way. And mentalism kind of interferes with why we do what we do. So what I got out of this is that basically when we start diving into mentalistic reasoning for behaviors, we kind of get distracted by the actual cause of a behavior. And it is very tempting to think that something happened due to, oh, she did that because she felt like it, or she did that because she wanted to. It's an easy way to think, but it's not a very accurate way to think because when a person behaves a certain way, it's because of something that happened in the environment. It's because of an environmental change. So that brings me to Skinner's suggestions of inner causes. He brings up three different ways that mentalistic explanations can be explained. They're neural, psychic, and conceptual. So basically, Skinner looked at these three reasons and decided that a neural cause is caused by the nerves and the nervous system, which is extremely vague and hard to really pinpoint whether or not that was what caused a behavior. The second would be psychic, which is that there are all references to the mind, nothing with physical dimensions. So basically, anything that happened is because of what's going on in the mind. And then he ended with the conceptual suggestion, which he said is the most common, and also it has no neural and no psychic reasoning behind it. It's all concepts. We believe that someone behaves in a particular way, and then we make up a general reason or condition that is supposed to be the cause of the behavior. So it should explain any person's behavior if it's that same exact behavior. Next, I would like to go into the correlation versus causation, and one of the most important things that is a takeaway from this is that correlation does not mean causation. Something can happen. I can fall off of my bike and then cry, but just because I fell off of my bike, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the reason why I'm crying. So yes, it's a correlation. I fell off my bike and then I started crying, but that might not be why I started crying. I might start crying because I remembered something from earlier, or I might cry because I'm embarrassed. I might cry because it brought back a different memory. So just because I'm crying right after I fell off the bike doesn't mean that the bike, falling off the bike, is what caused me to cry. That's basically correlation and causation. So next we go into public versus private events. And these are basically just things that happen on the inside versus on the outside. And Skinner defined it as there being no reason to assume that private events are fundamentally different from public events just because private events are less accessible. So a private event is basically a non-observable event. It's something that either happens within you or it's something that happens when you're alone. There's no one else there to observe it. There's no one there to really look into it. In that, they mention in the book, one thing that I found to be important about this is that a science of behavior focuses only on events that are real or natural as opposed to fictional or invented. So natural events, they need to be real, they need to be observable. But just because we cannot directly observe someone else's thoughts, we shouldn't just rule them out for investigation. Which brings us to thinking. So, thinking was defined by Skinner as behaving which automatically affects the behavior and is reinforcing because it does so. And basically what that means is that thinking, we should look at thinking in terms of environmental factors. So thinking is useful because it allows us to extend what we already know about verbal behavior, and it helps us to discourage mentalism. Sorry, I'm a little unorganized right now. Okay. So while thinking is important, it should always be explained in terms of common environmental factors. Next, we look into emotions and feelings, which are also private events, but just because they are private does not mean that they don't involve real events. So they talk about talking and thinking about feelings can give a causal relationship with environmental events. So just because they are private, when you think about them and you talk about them, you can kind of give them more, make them more real and give you more, show more of a causal relationship So lastly, the section about what to do about mentalism. Um, so the book lists out 3 different steps to reduce the use of mentalistic reasoning. So the first step is to recognize mentalistic talk and its implications, even when they're subtle. And then the second step is to learn how to rephrase mentalisms in a way that focuses on what can be observed about the behavior. And then thirdly, we want to systematically replace it with more appropriate scientific vocabulary, at least when you're in professional settings. So these are just a few ways that are important because we need to separate out the mentalistic thinking from what's actually there and what's actually observable. So I would like to end with a discussion question. I kind of got a little help from the book on this one. But basically, if I say, I feel sick, so I'm behaving this way, how can we talk about the behavior without assuming that feeling sick is the cause of the behavior? So that is a very mentalistic approach to it. So what I would like to discuss in our discussion forum is basically how we can talk about behaviors and without assuming that one thing causes another. All right, thank you for listening. I hope that this was effective.